The door had been locked for 11 years. When they finally forced it open, the dust on the desk was thick enough to write your name in. A coffee mug sat where someone had set it down, the contents long evaporated into a dark ring. Papers had yellowed. A wall clock had stopped. And yet, through a single speaker mounted near the ceiling, a voice was still talking. Calm, steady, reading out the time, the weather, a station identification. The same loop it had been playing every hour of every day for more than a decade. Nobody had worked there since 1990. To understand how this happens, you have to understand what a radio station actually is. We imagine a studio, a person at a microphone, headphones on, talking to the night. But the part that reaches you, the part that travels through the air and into your car, is a transmitter, a box. And a transmitter doesn't need a human being. It needs electricity and a signal to push out. That's all. In the late 20th century, automation arrived in broadcasting like a quiet tide. Stations installed reel-to-reel machines, then cartridge systems, then computer playlists that could run an entire overnight shift without a single living soul in the building. The technology was designed to save money, fewer staff, lower wages. A station could go dark on personnel while staying bright on the dial. What nobody fully anticipated was what would happen when a station was abandoned but the automation kept paying its own way. When the lease was forgotten, the bills auto-drafted, the equipment too obscure for anyone to notice it was still running. The signal didn't know it had been left behind. It just kept doing the one thing it was built to do, which raises a question that should unsettle you. How many of these are still out there right now? Here's the part that resets everything you assumed. The voice still broadcasting wasn't a recording made by a machine. It was a human being. A man who had read those station identifications into a microphone years before the building emptied out, and who, by the time anyone reopened that door, had been dead for years himself. This is the strange physics of recorded media. A voice is a moment captured. When you press record, you freeze a single breath of a single person on a single afternoon. Play it back and that person speaks again, whether they're in the next room or in another country or in a cemetery. We don't think about this enough. Every time you hear a familiar jingle, a station ID, a recorded weather line, you may be listening to someone who no longer exists, performing a task they finished and forgot about long ago. In this case, that loop had outlived its author. His colleagues had scattered. His employer had folded. The town had moved on. And still, every 60 minutes, his voice rose from the desert silence to announce a time of day, to nobody, with the patient confidence of a man clocking in for a shift that never ended. He had become, in the most literal sense, a ghost in the machine. There is a reason these stories cling to broadcast media specifically, and not, say, to abandoned factories or empty offices. Radio and television were built to carry the human voice and the human face into millions of homes at once. That intimacy is the whole point, and it means the medium has a long, uncomfortable history of capturing things it was never meant to capture. Consider what archives are now scrambling to preserve. In a recent announcement, every single episode of the public radio program, to the best of our knowledge, is being archived with the American Archive of Public Broadcasting. Decades of voices, many of them gone, frozen, and indexed forever. We treat this as preservation, culture, history. But step back and look at what it really is. A vault of the dead, talking. The same technology that lets us honor a life lets that life keep speaking long after it's over. A station that loops a dead man's voice for 11 years isn't a glitch in the system. It's the system working exactly as designed, just without anyone left to switch it off. The machine doesn't grieve. It doesn't notice the silence in the room. It only knows the next track in the queue, and it will play that track forever if you let it. Broadcasting's relationship with death runs darker still, because it has, on rare and terrible occasions, carried death itself live into the homes of strangers. On July 15, 1974, at WXLT-TV in Sarasota, Florida, a news reporter named Christine Chubbuck sat down to anchor the morning program Suncoast Digest. She was 30 years old, Partway through the broadcast, she looked into the camera and told her viewers that, in keeping with the station's policy of bringing them the latest in blood and guts, they were about to see an attempted suicide, and then she shot herself. She became the first person to die by suicide on a live television broadcast. Investigators later confirmed something that made the moment even harder to absorb. She had written those words into her own script in advance. The line wasn't improvised in a moment of breakdown. It was typed, planned, sitting in her pages, waiting. The broadcast went out. The medium did what it always does. It carried the voice faithfully, without judgment, to everyone tuned in. And here is the connection that should make your skin prickle. A camera, like a transmitter, doesn't know what it's recording. It simply records. It will keep your last words as carefully as it keeps a weather report. Sometimes the medium captures not one death, but thousands in real time, watched by nearly everyone alive at once. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the attacks became, in addition to an act of terrorism, a media event on a scale not seen since the advent of civilian global satellite links. The first hijacking began at approximately 8:14 in the morning Eastern Daylight Time. The final hijacked plane crashed at 10:03 a.m. The entire attack lasted less than 2 hours, and yet because of round-the-clock television news and the early internet, most of the events were known by a vast portion of the world's population as they were happening. Think about that timeline. Less than 2 hours. And in that window, the cameras stayed on. The signal stayed up. Anchors kept talking because that is the one thing the medium is built to do, keep broadcasting, no matter what is in front of the lens. The transmitters didn't flinch. They carried it all, frame by frame, to billions of people who would never forget it. The technology served us faithfully, and in serving us, it created a permanent, unblinking record of the worst morning many of us will ever live through. Which brings us back to a locked door in the desert. So picture the moment of discovery again, now that you understand the machinery behind it. A few people, a utility worker checking a meter, a new property owner, an engineer tracing a stubborn signal nobody could account for, finally cut the lock and stepped inside. The air was stale. The equipment hummed with that low electrical warmth that means power is flowing. And there it was, a playback unit, a simple automation rig faithfully cycling its loop. Station ID. Time. A bed of music. Repeat. It had been doing this for over a decade without supervision, without maintenance, without one human ear ever confirming it was still alive. The bills had been paid automatically out of an account nobody had closed. The transmitter had never failed, and the man whose voice introduced each hour was years in his grave. There is a particular kind of horror in this that has nothing to do with ghosts in the supernatural sense. It is the horror of redundancy, of being so completely unnecessary that the world keeps running your assigned task long after you've stopped existing. The voice didn't haunt the building. The building had simply forgotten how to stop the voice, and every hour on the hour, it spoke into a room where no one had stood for 11 years. Here is the detail that will follow you out of this video. Stations like this are not as rare as you'd hope. Across remote stretches of the world, automated low-power transmitters and forgotten relay equipment have been found still running years after their operators vanished. Abandoned during bankruptcies, ownership disputes, deaths, and the quiet collapse of small businesses nobody was watching. Radio enthusiasts who scan the dead zones of the dial sometimes stumble onto them. A faint station looping an old promo for a business that closed a decade ago. A voice cheerfully reading a forecast for a date that has long since passed. They call these ghost stations. Some have been traced. Many never are. And in an era where conspiracy thrives, where 62 years later the JFK assassination still fuels some of the country's biggest theories, where commentators monetize baseless claims, where every unexplained signal becomes a story, the mind reaches for something sinister. But the truth is quieter and somehow worse. There is no conspiracy here. Just a machine that was never told to stop, a voice that never knew it had ended, and a frequency in the dark that kept reaching out for an audience that left long ago. Somewhere right now, one of them may still be transmitting. The only question is whether anyone is left to hear it. A transmitter doesn't grieve. It doesn't notice the empty chair, the stopped clock, the dust on the desk. It just keeps reaching into the dark, broadcasting a voice that outlived the man who recorded it. So here's my question for you. If you found a station looping a dead man's words, would you turn it off or let him keep talking? Tell me below. And if these are the stories you can't stop thinking about, subscribe to Obscura Files. We're only just getting started.